Hi, happy First Chapter Friday. I just kicked everyone out of the deck here because I want to read my book to you guys outside. Shut the window, please. Oh my gosh, they're so bad. All right. Anyway, look at the beautiful setting. I thought I would take this outside because it's September and yet it's still beautiful. And I better get to the point. Today's book is not a fantasy. It is one of my favorites from a long time ago, and I know that it hasn't changed and how wonderful it is. And it's the series, The Recruit, the Cherub series. All right. You can tell it's a worn out copy. However, it is, there we go, right there. It is a fantastic thriller. And it is super similar to the Alex Rider series, only I feel like it's so much more believable. I do love the Alex Rider series, but it's kind of over the top. I mean, Alex is Mr. Everything and can do everything. It's a little unrealistic, okay? So here we go. It's Thursday, and I'm going to do not a first chapter Friday. I'm going to do a 3-chapter Thursday. Thanks, Sean. That was a hint by a friend of mine. All right, so here we go. The Recruit. It's by Robert Muchamore. Okay, British guy. All right, it starts off with a prologue. What is Cherub? During World War II, French civilians set up a resistance movement to fight against the German forces occupying their country. Many of their most useful operatives were children and teenagers. Some worked as scouts and messengers, others befriended homesick German soldiers and gathered information that enabled the resistance to sabotage the German military operation. A British spy named Charles Henderson worked among these French children for nearly 3 years, and after returning to Britain, he used what he'd learned in France to train 20 British boys for work on undercover operations. The code name for this unit was Cherub. Henderson died in 1946, but the organization he created has thrived. Cherub now has more than 250 agents, all 17 or under. Although there have been many technical advances in intelligence operations since Cherub was founded, the reason for its existence remains the same. Adults never suspect children are spying on them. But we know they do. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. Like I said, you're getting three chapters. Chapter 1, Science. James Choke hated combined science. It should have been test tubes and jets of gas and sparks flying all over the place like he'd imagined when he was still in primary school. What he got was an hour propped up on a stool watching Miss Vult write on a blackboard. You had to write everything down, even though the photocopier got invented 40 years earlier. It was his second to last class, raining outside and turning dark. James was sleepy because the lab was hot, and he'd been up late playing Grand Theft Auto the night before. Samantha Jennings sat next to him. Teachers thought Samantha was fantastic, always volunteering for stuff, neat, glossed nails. She did all her diagrams with 3 different colored pens and covered her textbooks in wrapping paper so they looked extra smart. But when the teachers weren't looking, Samantha was a total cow. James hated her. She was always winding him up about his mom being fat. James's mom's so fat, they have to grease the bathtub or she gets stuck in it. Samantha's cronies laughed, same as always. James's mom was huge. She had to order her clothes out of a special catalog for fat people. It was a nightmare being seen with her. People pointed and they stared. Little kids mimicked the way she walked. But James loved his mom. He tried to find excuses when she wanted to go somewhere with him, however. I went for a 5-mile jog yesterday, Samantha said. 2 laps around James's mom. Ha ha! James looked up from his textbook. That's so funny, Samantha. Even funnier than the first 3 times you said it. James was one of the toughest kids in year 7. Any boy cussing his mom would get a punch. But what could you do when it was a girl? Next lesson, he'd sit as far from Samantha as he could. "Your mom is so fat!" James was sick of it. He jumped up. His stool tipped over backwards. "What is it with you, Samantha?" James shouted. The lab went quiet. Every eye turned to the action. "What's the matter, James?" Samantha grinned. "Can't take a joke?" "Mr. Choke, pick up your seat and get on with your work," Ms. Vult shouted. "You say one more word, Samantha, I'll—" James was never any good at comebacks. "I'll bloody—" Samantha giggled. "What will you do, James? Go home and cuddle big fat mommy?" James wanted to see something other than a stupid grin on Samantha's face. He grabbed Samantha off her stool, pushed her up against the wall, then spun her around to face him. He froze in shock. Blood was running down Samantha's face. Her cheek had a long cut where it had been caught on a nail sticking out of the wall. James backed away, scared. Samantha cupped her hands over the blood and started bawling her head off. "James Choke, you are in extremely serious trouble," Ms. Vult shouted. Everyone in James's class was making some sort of noise. James couldn't face up to what he'd done. No one would believe it was an accident. He made a run for the door. Miss Vult grabbed James's blazer. "Get out of my way!" James shouted. He gave Miss Vult a shove. She toppled backwards, limbs flipping helplessly in the air like a beetle turned upside down. He slammed the classroom door and ran down the corridor. The school gates were locked, but he escaped over the barrier in the teacher's car park. James stormed away from school, muttering to himself, getting less angry and more scared as it dawned on him he was in the deepest trouble of his life. He was 12 in a few weeks' time. He'd started wondering if he'd live that long. His mom was going to kill him. He definitely would get suspended. It was probably bad enough to get expelled. By the time James got to the little playground near his flats, he felt sick. He looked at his watch. If he went home this early, his mom would know something was up. He didn't have change for a cup of tea in the chip shop. The only thing to do was go into the playground and shelter from the drizzle in the concrete tunnel. The tunnel seemed smaller than James remembered. There was graffiti sprayed all over it, and it smelled like a dog peed inside. James didn't mind. He felt he deserved to be somewhere cold that smelled of dog. He rubbed his hands to get them warm and remembered when he was little. His mom was nowhere near as fat in those days. Her face would appear in the end of the tunnel with a daft grin. She'd speak in a deep voice. "I'm coming to eat you up, James." It was cool, because the tunnel had a killer echo when you were sitting inside. James tried the echo. "I'm a total idiot, 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 idiot." The echo agreed with him. He pulled his coat hood up, and he did the zip to the top so it covered half his face. After half an hour sulking, James knew he had two options: stay in the tunnel for the rest of his life, or go home and get killed. James stepped into the hallway of his flat and checked the mobile phone on the table under the coat rack. 12 missed calls from an unidentified number. It looked like the school had been trying to get a hold of his mom pretty bad, but she hadn't answered. James thanked God, but wondered why she hadn't picked up. Then he noticed Uncle Ron's jacket hanging up. Uncle Ron had turned up when James was a toddler. It was like having a loud, smelly rug in the flat. Ron smoked, drank, and only went out to go to the pub. But he got a job once. It only lasted a fortnight. James had always thought that Ron was an idiot, and his mom had eventually agreed and kicked him out. but only after she'd married him and given birth to his daughter. Even now, James's mom had a soft spot for Ron. They'd never gotten a divorce. Ron turned up every few weeks, supposedly to see his daughter Lauren, but mostly he just came when Lauren was at school and he was short a few quid. James walked into the living room. His mom, Gwen, was spread out on the sofa. Her feet were up on the stool and her left leg was bandaged. Ron was in an armchair, feet on the coffee table, toes poking out of socks. They were both drunk. "Mom, you're not supposed to drink with your pills," James said, so annoyed he'd forgotten his problems. Ron straightened up and took a drag of his cigarette. "Hey, Jamie boy, Daddy's home," Ron said, grinning. James and Ron eyed each other up. "You're not my father, Ron," James said. "No," Ron replied. "Your dad legged it the day he saw your ugly face." James didn't want to say about school in front of Ron, but the truth was eating at him. "Mom, something happened at school. It was an accident." "Wet your pants again, did you?" Ron giggled. James didn't want to take the bait. "Listen, James, me darlin'," Gwen said, slurring her words. "Whatever trouble you in this time, we'll talk later. Go and get your sister from school. I've had a few too many drinkies, and I better not drive." "Sorry, Mom. It's really serious. I have to tell you." "Just get your sister, James," his mom said sternly. "My head's pounding." "Lauren's big enough to come home on her own," James said. "She isn't," Ron interrupted. "Do what you're told. He needs my boot up his backside if you ask me." "How much money does he want this time?" James asked sarcastically. Gwen waved her hand in front of her face. She was fed up with both of them. "Can't you two stay in the same room for 2 minutes without fighting? James, go to my purse. Buy something for tea on the way home. I'm not cooking tonight." "But get out, James, before I lose my temper." James couldn't wait until he was old enough to batter Uncle Ron. His mom was okay when Ron wasn't around. James found his mom's purse in the kitchen. A tenner was enough for dinner, but he took 2 20s. Ron would steal everything in the purse before he left, so James wouldn't get blamed. It felt nice stuffing 40 quid into his school trousers. Gwen never left anything lying around that she didn't expect James or Ron to steal. She kept the big money upstairs in a safe. All right, keeping this going. We're on chapter 2. Sister. Some kids were happy to have one games console. James Choke had every console, game, and accessory going. He had a PC, an MP3 player, Nokia mobile, widescreen TV, and DVD recorder in his room. He never looked at any of it. If something got broke, he got another one. He had 8 pairs of Nike trainers, a top-line skateboard, a 600-pound racing bike. When his bedroom was a mess, it looked like a bomb had gone off in a Toys R Us store. James had all this because Gwen Choke was a thief. She ran a shoplifting enterprise from her armchair while she watched daytime soaps and stuffed chocolates and pizza. She didn't steal herself. Gwen took orders and passed them down to thieves who worked for her. She covered her tracks, never going near the stolen goods herself, and switching mobiles every few days so that police couldn't trace her calls. It was the first time James had been back to primary school since his last day as a pupil before the summer holidays. A few mums stood at the gate nattering. "Where's your mom, James?" someone asked. "Off her face," James said sourly. There was no way James was covering for her after she'd kicked him out of the flat. He saw the other moms exchanging glances. "I want a Medal of Honor for PlayStation," one of them asked. "Can she get it?" James shrugged. "Course. Half the price. Cash only." "Will you remember, James?" "No. Give us a bit of paper with your name and phone number, and I'll pass it on." The gaggle of moms started jotting things down. Trainers, jewelry, radio-controlled car. James stuffed the papers into his school blazer. "If you want to tell my mom something, write it down. I won't remember." The kids all started coming out. 9-year-old Lauren was last out of her class. She had her hands tucked in her bomber jacket and mud on her jeans from playing football with the boys at lunchtime. Lauren had blonde hair, same as James, but she kept asking her mom to let her dye it black. Lauren was on another planet to most girls her age. She didn't own a single dress or skirt. She microwaved her Barbies when she was 5 and hadn't touched one since. Gwen Choke said that if there were 2 ways of doing something, Lauren would always pick the third. "I hate that old bat," Lauren said when she got near James. "Who?" James asked. "Mrs. Reed. She gave us sums. I did them in about 2 minutes, and she made me sit still for the rest of the lesson waiting for all the dumb kids to finish. She wouldn't even let me go to the cloakroom to get my book." James remembered Mrs. Reed had done the same thing when she was his teacher 3 years earlier. It was like getting punished for being clever. "Why are you here anyway?" Lauren asked. "Mom's drunk." "She's not supposed to drink under the operation." "Don't tell me," James said. "What can I do about it?" "How come you got home early enough to pick me up?" "I got in a fight. They sent me home." Lauren shook her head, but she couldn't help smiling. "Another fight. That's 3 this term, isn't it?" James didn't want to talk about it. "What do you want first?" he asked. "Good news or bad news?" Lauren shrugged. "Just tell us." "Your dad's indoors. The good news is Mom gave us money to get takeaway. He should be gone by the time we get home." They ended up at a burger place. James got a double cheeseburger, and Lauren only wanted onion rings and a Coke. She wasn't hungry, so she got handfuls of little milks and sugar packets and made a mess on the table while James ate. She tipped out loads of sugar, soaked it up with milk, and then shredded the paper wrappers and stirred it all up. "What are you doing that for?" James asked. "As a matter of fact," Lauren said acidly, "the entire future of Western civilization depends upon me making a smiley face with this ketchup." "You realize some poor sod has to clean all that up?" James asked. "Not my problem," Lauren shrugged. James tucked in the last mouthful of his burger and realized he was still starving. Lauren had hardly touched her onion rings. "You eating those?" James asked. "Have some if you want. They're stone cold." "This is all we've got for dinner. You better eat something." "I'm not hungry," Lauren said. "I'll make toasted sandwiches later." James loved Lauren's toasted sandwiches. They were mad. She got Nutella, honey, icing sugar, golden syrup, and chocolate chips. Whatever sweet stuff was around, and poured it on thick. The outside was crispy, and the hot gloop was about 3 centimeters deep in the middle. You couldn't eat one without burning your fingers. "You better clean up afterwards," James said. "Mom blew her stack last time you made them." When James turned into his road, it was nearly dark. 2 guys came out from behind a hedge. One of them grabbed James and knocked him against a wall, pulling his arm tight behind his back. "Hello, James," he said, his mouth up against James's ear. "We've been waiting for you." The other guy grabbed Lauren and stuck his hand over her mouth to stop her screaming. James's opinion of his own intelligence hit an all-time low. While he'd been worrying about getting in trouble with Mom, school, and maybe even the police, he'd forgotten something. Samantha Jennings had a 16-year-old brother. Greg Jennings hung with a gang of crazies. They were the kings of the neighborhood where James lived, smashing up cars, mugging people, getting into fights. If another kid saw them, he'd better look down at his shoes and cross his fingers and be happy if he got away with just a slapped face and his money taxed. A good way to upset the gang was to beat up one of their little sisters. Greg Jennings grazed James's face along the bricks. "It's your turn now, James." He let go of James's arm. James could feel blood dribbling down his nose and cheek. There was no point struggling. Greg could snap him like a twig. "Scared?" Greg asked. "You ought to be." James tried to speak, only his voice didn't work, and the way he was trembling seemed to answer anyway. "Got money?" Greg asked. James took out the rest of the 40 pounds. "Nice one," Greg said. "Please don't hurt my sister," James begged. "My sister has 8 stitches in her face," Greg said, pulling a knife out of his pocket. "Lucky I don't go around hurting little girls, or your sister might have ended up with 80. Greg sliced off James's school tie. Then he cut the chest buttons off his shirt and slashed up his trousers. "This is just a start, James," Greg said. "We're going to be seeing a lot of each other." A fist smashed into James's stomach. Ron had hit James a few times, but never that hard. Greg and his henchmen walked off. James crumpled up on the ground. Lauren walked over to James. She didn't have much sympathy for him. "You got in a row with Samantha Jennings?" James looked up at his sister. He was in a lot of pain and ashamed of himself. "She got cut by accident. I only meant to scare her." Lauren started walking away. "Help me up, Lauren. I can't walk." "Crawl then." Lauren went a few more paces before she realized she wouldn't abandon her brother, even if he was an idiot. James stumbled toward home with his arm around Lauren's back. It took all her strength to hold him up. And our final chapter, because it has a killer ending and a great hook, Chapter 3, Worse. James stumbled into the hallway, one hand clasped over his stomach. He glanced at the display on his mom's mobile. 48 missed calls and 4 texts. He turned the phone off and he stuck his head in the living room. The light was off, TV on. His mom was asleep in her chair and there was no sign of Ron. "He's gone," James said. "Thank God for that," Lauren said. "He always kisses me and his breath is revolting." Lauren pushed the front door shut and picked a handwritten note off from the doormat. "It's from your school." Lauren read aloud, struggling with the messy handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Choke, please contact either the school secretary or myself urgently on one of the numbers below con something? Concerning?" James guessed. "Concerning James's behavior at school today," Lauren continued. "Michael Rook, deputy head teacher." Lauren followed James into the kitchen. James ran a glass of tap water and slumped at the table. Lauren sat opposite and kicked off her trainers. "Mom will absolutely massacre you," Lauren grinned. She was looking forward to seeing James suffer. "Can't you just shut up? I'm trying not to think about it." James locked himself in the bathroom. He was shocked by what the mirror showed him. The left side of his face and the ends of his cropped blonde hair were blood red. He emptied his pockets and stuffed his wrecked clothes in a bin liner. He'd hide them under the other rubbish later, so his mom didn't find them. Ending up in this mess made James start asking questions about himself. He knew he wasn't a very good person. He was always getting in fights. He was clever, but he never did any work, so he got bad marks. James remembered all the times his teachers had told him he was wasting his potential, and that he'd end up in a bad way. He'd sat through billions of lectures with his brain turned off. Now he was beginning to think that they were mostly right, and that made him hate them even more. James unscrewed the cap on a tube of antiseptic, but realized it was pointless without washing off the blood first. The hot shower soothed his face and stomach as the red puddle whirled around his feet. James wasn't sure if God existed, but he couldn't see how everything just got here without making it. If there was ever a time to pray, this was it. He wondered if you were supposed to pray while naked in the shower, but figured what the hell, and pressed his wet hands together. Hello, God. I'm not always good. Not ever really. Just help me be good and stuff. Help me be a better person. Cheers. Amen. And please don't let Greg Jennings kill me. James looked awkwardly at his hands, not convinced about the power of prayer. After the shower, James put on his favorite clothes, an Arsenal shirt and a pair of tatty Nike tracksuit bottoms. He had to hide them from his mom. She chucked out anything that didn't look as if it had been shoplifted the previous week. She never understood that it was cooler if some of your clothes were a bit on the shabbier side. After milk, 2 of Lawrence toasted sandwiches, and a half hour of playing G24 with his duvet over him, James felt a little better. Except his stomach killed him if he moved suddenly, and he wasn't looking forward to telling his mom what he had done when she woke up. Not that she'd look like she was waking up soon. She must have had loads to drink. James crashed his car into the barrier, and 6 cars whizzed past, leaving him in last place. He hurled the joypad. He always got that corner wrong. The computer-controlled cars went round like they were on rails, which made it seem like the game was rubbing it in. It was boring playing alone, but there was no point in asking Lauren. She hated computer games. She only ever wanted to play football or draw. James grabbed his mobile and called his friend Sam. Sam lived down the balcony and was in James's class. "Hello, Mr. Smith? This is James Choke. Is Sam there?" Sam picked up the phone that was in his bedroom, sounding excited. "Hey there, psycho," Sam said, laughing. "You are in so much trouble." That wasn't how James wanted the conversation to start. "What happened after I left?" "Man, it was the sickest thing ever. Samantha had blood gushing out of her face, down her arms, everywhere. And then they took her in this ambulance. Miss Vult hurt her back, and she was crying and going, 'This is the last straw. I'm taking an early retirement.' Both the deputy heads and the headmaster came in. The headmaster saw Miles laughing and gave him a 3-day suspension." James couldn't believe it. 3-day suspension for laughing? He was livid. "You're totally expelled, James." "No way." "Yes way, psycho. You never even made it to your first half term. That's got to be a record for getting expelled. Did your mom give you beats?" "She doesn't know yet. She's asleep." Sam burst out laughing. "Asleep? Don't you think she might want you to wake her up and tell her you've been expelled?" "She won't care," James lied, trying to sound cool. "So, do you want to come over and play PlayStation?" Sam's voice got more serious. "No, man. I got homework." James laughed. "You never do homework." "I started. The folks are pressuring me. Birthday presents hang in the balance." James knew Sam was lying, but couldn't figure out why. Normally, Sam asked his mom if he could come, and she always said yes.
What? What have I done to upset you? It's not that, James, but what, Sam? Isn't it obvious? No. You're a mate, James, but we can't hang out until this dies down. Why the hell not? Because Greg Jennings is going to totally bash you in, and if I'm seen with you, I'll be dead as well.
You could help me stand up to him, James said. Sam thought this was the funniest thing yet.
My skinny arse isn't going to make any difference against those guys. I really like you, James. You're a good friend, but at the moment, being your friend is a suicide mission.
Thanks for your help, Sam.
Should have switched your brain on before you decided to stab the hardest kid in school's little sister on a rusty nail. I never meant to hurt her. It was an accident. Ring me back when you get Greg Jennings to believe that.
I can't believe you're doing this to me, Sam.
You'd do the same if it was me, and you know it.
So that's it. I'm a total leper.
It's a toughie, James. Sorry.
Yeah.
We can talk on the phone. I still like you.
Thanks, Sam.
I better go, though. Bye, James. I'm really sorry.
Enjoy your homework. James ended the call and wondered about praying again. James watched rubbish TV until he fell asleep. He had a dream where Greg Jennings stood on his guts and woke up with a jolt. He needed to pee badly. The pain in his guts was 50 times worse than earlier. The first drop of his piss hitting the toilet was red. James did a double take. Oops, bright red. He was peeing blood. And after he had been to the toilet, the pain was mostly gone, but he was scared. He had to tell his mom. The TV in the living room was still turned up loud. James flicked it off. "Mom," James said. James felt weird. His mom was too quiet. He touched her hand. Cold. He put his hand in front of her face. She wasn't breathing. No pulse. Nothing. James hugged Lauren in the back of the ambulance. Their mom's corpse was 2 feet away with a blanket on top. Lauren's hands clawed into James's back. James was freaking, but he tried to keep a lid on himself to stop Lauren from getting worse. When the ambulance arrived at emergency, James watched his mom get wheeled off on a trolley. He realized this was going to be his final memory of her, a bulging blanket lit by flashing blue bulbs. James had to step off the ambulance with Lauren holding on. There was no way she was letting go. She'd stopped crying and was panting like an animal. Lauren walked like a zombie. The driver led them through the waiting room to a cubicle. A doctor was waiting. She knew what happened. "I'm Dr. May. You must be Lauren and James." James rubbed Lauren's shoulder to try to calm her down. "Lauren, can you let go of your brother so we can talk?" Lauren acted deaf. "It's like she's dead," James said. "She's in shock. I'll have to give her something to calm her down or she'll pass out." Dr. May picked a syringe off the trolley and pulled up the sleeve of Lauren's t-shirt. "Hold her still." As soon as the needle went in, Lauren went limp. James leaned her down on the bed. Dr. May picked up Lauren's legs and covered her with a blanket. "Thank you," James said. "You told the ambulance driver that you had some blood in your urine," Dr. May said. "Yeah." "Did something hit you in the stomach?" "Someone," James said. "I got in a fight. Is that bad?" "When you were hit, your inside started to bleed. It's the same as a cut on the outside. It should heal itself. Come back here if it hasn't stopped by tomorrow night." "So what happens to us now?" James asked. "There's a social worker coming to see you. She'll contact your relatives." "I don't have relatives," My nan died last year. I don't know who my dad is. That is where I'm going to end it. So somehow he's going to become part of Cherub. He's going to go through the whole recruit process. Why is he selected? What happens to him and his sister? And there's bound to be some repercussions for his mom being a criminal. And now who's going to take care of business? Did she owe money? What type of stuff's going to happen next? It is a pretty long series. I think there's like 12, maybe 12 whole volumes to it. And all the volumes I read, I think I got up to number 10, I'm pretty sure. There was only one book because each one is a specific mission and he ages as the books go on. And out of all of them, only one of them I thought was just so-so. The rest were excellent. Kind of like how I felt the beginning of this one opens, where it just reels you in to care about the main characters, and you can tell that there's danger on every corner in the rest of his life, just from this opening. So do read the rest. I hope I hooked you. And that's it for Thursday, 3 chapters. Okay, bye now.